Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. It's one IREE Infra Live. So, IREE is an institute for relationship reform between state and companies, and it's an independent organization. Our mission is to promote democratic debate to improve the interaction between public and private sector. So it's a pleasure to have everybody here. So let me introduce you to Amanda Clark, that is an executive director of CBRE, where she's head of strategic advisory, head of public sector, and chair of strategic board. Welcome on board, Amanda.
Lovely to see you, Marcia. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. It's going to be a very good conversation. Also, welcome Agnes Costa, has been the head of special advisory on regulatory affairs at the Ministry of Mines and Energy here in Brazil since January 2019, specialized in energy and mining economies. So everything related to energy is with Agnes. So thank you so much for coming, Agnes.
Thank you, Marcia, for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. This subject is very important for us in the coming years, so it's a pleasure.
And Agnes is also member of the board of IREE Infrastructure. So also welcome Marcia Ferraresi. It's also Marcia Ferrari, so we are almost the same person. So Marcia, welcome on board. She's a managing director at Patria Investment, responsible for value creation, technical and engineering activities with the infrastructure area. Before joining Patria, she worked at Promon for 15 years, and she's very welcome with us.
Thank you, Marcia, for invitation. Hi, everybody who is with me in this webinar, and very nice to be here.
And last but not least, just because of the alphabetical order, right, Rose? So I also welcome Rose Hoffman, legislative consultant at the Chamber of Deputies since 2015, working in environmental and environmental law, territorial organization, urban and territorial development. She has also held the position of Director of Environmental Licensing at the Brazilian Institute for the Environmental Renewable Natural Resources, IBAMA. So welcome on board, Rose.
Thank you, Marcia, for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much.
So just to give a little bit of a context of what we are going to debate today. So from October 21st till November the 12th, happened in Glasgow, so in the land of Amanda, kind of, the COP26, where experts from all around the world get together to debate science, solution, and solidarity regarding climate change. After 2 weeks of intense discussion, a new commitment has wrapped up. For the first time, this conference has had a specific focus on cities, regions, and buildings, since these classes of assets contribute to around 40% of global carbon emission. Now, the pressure in governments, regulators, and also in private companies to make the decarbonization is a reality. Having said that, this decade is critical to make changes that can limit global warming to as close as possible to 1.5. So this call to action will change the way we live, the way we do things, and the way we also build things in real estate and also in infrastructure. Having said that, I will stop talking and I will let my invitees today to talk a little bit. So the first question is for all of us, for the ones that had gone to COP26 and for the ones that just heard about it. How was your experience related to COP26? Is the world going to the right direction? Are we going to achieve our, let's say, our target? So what was your experience? So let's start with Agnes. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Marcia. So this was my first COP. From what I've heard, it was a big difference from this COP to the last one in Madrid. And what I experienced is that there was this effervency, effervescence at this location with private sector and society very engaged in the discussions. From my participation, I was in the official delegation from Brazil with the Minister of Mines and Energy. So we had like an official agenda there, but it was very pleasant and impressive to see how much engaged the society was, but especially the private sector. And this is where I come to what I have been observing since COVID-19. All this talk about stakeholders, capitalism, ESG, I think we see that private sector and society see that governments alone won't do the decarbonization and that they have to engage themselves as well. So it was really interesting to see this this ritual alimentation. I don't know how we say this. This wheel with everybody discussing the same agenda. And another thing that I think it's very good and impressive is that there was a big discussion about climate justice. So coming from a developing country, we are doing all the efforts we can, specifically, I can say from the energy sector to engage in energy transition. In our case, we are in a very well positioned with very clean energy and electricity mixes. But we know that there is a lot of social inclusion to happen in Brazil that will imply in consumption increase. So one of our events at the Energy Day was about, for example, energy efficiency, to show that we have to be conscious about this and what we have already been doing in this agenda. But we know that the challenges for developing countries will be higher, bigger, and on the other hand, that we have to be very sympathetic and conscious that energy transitions are several pathways, and they have to be the most effective ones for each society, depending on the resources that they have, the technologies that they have, because this may cost a lot for societies as a whole. And we cannot allow this technological choices to increase income disparities and inequalities. So, and then this was a big preoccupation in COP26, and I think this is a very good agenda. And we are not here talking specifically about the official commitments, because they are always discussing about whose fault is for the emissions in the last centuries or those things. But in fact, that every choice that we do as a society, we have to look that this won't lock out people and technologies that are important for other realities. Because when we are talking about technological innovation, we are always talking from a developed point of view, because they are ahead in technological development. But I have one big point of a paradigm is we discuss a lot in the energy sector electrification, and this makes sense. But in Brazil, we come from a country that has developed an important biofuel industry and technology in transportation related to biofuels. That might suit better other countries in Africa, in Asia, than electrification. And I can say this because in Brazil, electrification wouldn't be a problem. We have a very big and interconnected system, all kinds of renewable energies, but we know that there are continents that don't have this. So it's very excluding when we say that the only way to decarbonize is through electrification of mobility. So we have to think about these narratives. And I think that society is now aware of this. So we have to come up with inclusive narratives for decarbonization. So this was a big impression that I had, that I think it's very important.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will ask now Amanda. Amanda, so I think it's very important your participation here with us today, because we don't want just to be looking at the mirror as Brazil, but we would like to see what is there outside the window. So what was your impression related to your overall comment related to COP?
Thank you, Marcia. Look, it's really exciting, isn't it, that we've come together, and obviously COP26 was delayed because of the pandemic that, we've all been wrapped up in. But I think the second week was particularly a focus for the built environment. We had the gender agenda for sustainability, which was on the Tuesday, which I think was, it was great to see that firmly on the agenda. And transport really became the focus on the Wednesday. And I think that intersectionality between effectively real estate and infrastructure is so key for all of us. So real assets. So I think let's not lose sight of the Wednesday agenda as well. But of course, Thursday was the big day, which is where we had cities, regions, and the built environment. And of course, I think it's it's important to remember that COP is not the end point, it's actually the start point. So actually COP26 is about having the conversations that then lead to the actions that follow. And I think that's going to be the key for us. What we achieved at COP26 was 197 nations signing up, which I think was, a huge achievement. We saw fossil fuels really firmly on the agenda, and at least a commitment towards negating the impact of fossil fuels, which I think is incredibly huge. But I think actually, we have to look at, if we're looking at the built environment, I think there's a really interesting fact that 80% of the buildings that we need by 2050 already exist. So it's more around, as well as thinking about the new build and what we need to focus on there, it's also about the embedded carbon and how we negate and repurpose a lot of the buildings that we have. You mentioned, Marcia, the statistic about 40% of the total carbon footprint coming from buildings and the energy used by buildings and infrastructure. And for me, that really says that we have to do more. There was something that I think could have got lost from COP26 is something that was launched there, which was the Industrial Deep Decarbonisation Initiative, so IDDI. And I think that's one perhaps for people to think about. A number of governments signed up to it. And that's really exciting because for me, it's what gets measured, gets done. So the IDDI looked at measuring and then also gradually reducing and driving down embodied carbon on publicly procured construction projects through to 2025. And that is new, and that's going to be the biggest source of emissions and drive for change in the sector post 2030 as well. Another one to look out for is that the Construction Leadership Council were centre stage at COP26, and they launched their Construct Zero report and has a really good framework and principles that I think can be universally adopted throughout, looking at ways that we improve construction and construction processes, particularly around modern methods of construction. There's also the International Construction Measurement Standard, ICMS3. Why is that exciting? Well, one, it covers 49 globally prominent organisations that have come together around international cost measurement. But ICMS3 is exciting, and that's been launched just off of the back of COP, because basically it really looks for the first time to actually measure carbon in a universal way. And what gets measured gets done. And if we've got a universal standard, I think that's really exciting. And I think the other one, just to mention finally, is green finance. And I'll perhaps come on to that a little bit more when we talk, because I think that took centre stage. And when the financiers start to take an interest in sustainability, that's when things start to get serious, and that's where actions follow. So for me, that's incredibly exciting. And I think there's a real appetite for sustainable finance, and all of that comes on the focus that we've seen in COP26.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And so now I give the stage for Marcia Ferraresi, that also had gone to COP, and she's from private sector. And what you had seen there, Marcia, that you want to share with us?
I totally agree with Amanda and Agnes, and I think that was a different COP. It was my first one, but I talked to many people there, and they said that it's different. Now, I think that we start talking about how we are gonna get there, and not what is sustainability and how can we do that. We have to do something now. And as Amanda said, I think it's the financial sector are very interested now. And I think that the key point in order to change how we see the things and how things is going to be done. Just something, I think that 9% of the GDP was there. And 9% of the GDP are now committed to mid-century decarbonization. So it was in 2019, it was 30% of the GDP that was committed. Now we have a really commitment to be there. Maybe some people are disappointed from what we have, but it's the beginning of the journey. We have to do, and we have to do faster than we are doing right now. And I think that technology is the key point here. You're just gonna achieve decarbonization with technology investment. We are a country that has a lot of renewables, but there are other countries that don't have this. So we have to know how to transfer technology and how to analyze good projects to put money on that projects. So the key point here is how to transfer money from the developed countries to not countries under development to achieve the mid-century decarbonization.
Thank you, Marcia. Now I'm coming to Rose. So PPI had been on COP26, and Marta Cellier had done like an amazing job and talking a little bit about our priorities, our pipeline of projects and everything. So Rose, what do you have for us related to this topic? You are on mute, Rose.
Sorry. Talking about the PPI, Marta was there in person. I was not there in person, but I followed all the debates. My perception in relation to COP26 is to realize that Brazil is back at the top of the debate. Brazil is historically an example of sustainability, and we need to show that this is still our priority. In the field of infrastructure, COP26 showed us that the challenge is huge, but that we are also in the right direction here on PPI. PPI is the investment partnership program, and talking about transport specifically, logistics planning in Brazil was improved a lot in recent years, even because we were inspired by the UK model, the 5Ks model. Today, transport planning is stable, predictable, and responsible. Multi-criteria analysis is applied at different moments of public policy development, and environmental criteria are always considered. We work in this way not only because we need to rebalance our matrix of transports, but also to correctly plan the land use in the territory, taking advantage of positive potential and avoiding some conflicts, for example, with protected areas such as national parks or indigenous territories. I can say that we already had a plan for green infrastructure here on PPI, but what COP26 gave us was a good perspective of having more partners working in the same way, with the same focus, I can say, and that will be very good for the green development of the Brazil economy, I think.
So thank you. So you mentioned a lot transport, and I would like to know for the public sector, which are the key opportunities for the public sector and the building environment in general that was highlighted on COP26. An important thing to mention, and I will give this, I would like to know by Agnes, if there is something specific related to energy. I also would like to know from Amanda, because I know Amanda is very much involved on conversations related to transport. And also, Rose, if you want to mention anything specific related to transportation. And Marcia, please also feel free to add related to the portfolio that Patria has.
Okay, Marcia. So from our perspective, what we see at this moment, there are different talks and opportunities, I would say. So one is related to digitalization and grids and smart cities. So in terms of what we can do, and we are doing, for example, in Brazil with power sector reform, is enabling that new business models, new regulatory approaches like regulatory sandboxes are used, so that, for example, we can use the data that is produced with regulatory sandboxes to create better incentives for smarter solutions in cities, for example, and then thinking about the public sector with public illumination and those initiatives and obligations, that they are more intelligent and less power consuming, for example. So these are challenges and opportunities that we can now deal with because of digitalization, and this is very strong in the power sector. Then, when we think about transportation, and Rose can talk about this better, is we see several models for transportation and discussions, for example, in hydrogen. How can we enable an infrastructure and logistics for the transportation of hydrogen in Brazil? It's such an enormous country. So then we are discussing in Brazil a new gas market. This is also a regulatory reform, looking into making this market more efficient, because we see in Brazil the role of natural gas as what we call a transitioning fuel, from more emitting ones to less emitting ones. And then we are building infrastructures, for example, pipelines and grids. So we have since I don't know September more or less, a new gas law, and we had to regulate this law. And we are looking into that this regulation enables that this new infrastructure can be used to transport, for example, mix of natural gas with hydrogen, mix of natural gas with biogas, or only biogas, so that we design the infrastructure coupled with this idea of energy transition. So these are things that we are doing in Brazil, and that is very related to these discussions at COP, that we have to pay attention to stranded assets, that we should develop countries. In our case, we have all these challenges with this enormous territory to connect everything, and the industries. When we are discussing now the creation of a market and an industry for hydrogen. And then we are looking, for example, now more easier to develop these green hydrogen hubs, but they are mainly thought for exports. But we have to design or enable the country to benefit from this resource as well. So we have to couple this discussion with the development of the whole infrastructure for the country as well, for inland. And this is then what we are discussing now, that was proposed in the directive for the National Hydrogen Program, and that we will have to amend. But we are working only on it.
Okay, maybe we missed some thing, but I think that the concept was very clear.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Amanda, for the public sector, what did you see there?
Well, I think, look, public sector's got a real opportunity. So, you know, what is the public sector? So I think they have the opportunity to set policy, which is the key. And when it's set in policy, then effectively that encourages change. And I think, you know, there's things that can be set in policy around the changes that we want to see. Particularly, as Agnes highlighted, you know, that piece around clean energy, you know, that's a target for all governments. And I think the real push as well to electric vehicles is what we're seeing as a real drive, again, across many nations. And, you know, it's really interesting in the period, I think it was from 2014 to 2019, the increase in percentage of electric vehicles around the world has risen by 900%. And that's the very early stages, and we haven't got that infrastructure. So, you know, where public sector can come in is about the policy and also the pump priming investment to help some of those key infrastructures that are going to drive the change to come in. And I think the other point is around that I made earlier, which is kind of like around clienting. So actually, the public sector does so much in terms of the investment and build around the built environment, that they have the ability to really own the agenda. And I think for me, that's where that industrial decarbonisation initiative, if that's mandatory, as it is now for the UK and other governments, to drive down embodied carbon, then that's actually that you're going to see that kind of like manifest itself through the supply chain as well. And I think that's where, again, you can have impact. It was interesting, Agnes, you mentioned stranded assets, and I think, you know, we're seeing a lot of change, particularly retail, through the pandemic. I think in many nations has been very hard hit, particularly secondary retail. And certainly, you know, what we're seeing in the UK is a lot of local authorities actually taking over some of that retail asset and then looking at how do you repurpose it. So actually public sector taking control over some of what was effectively private sector asset. So I think there's a really huge role for the public sector on the back of all of this to really start to own the agenda, to set the agenda, and then to drive it over the next few years.
And Rose, for you, any specific change on portfolio priorities and things like that?
Yeah, I understand that the opportunities are many because we have a portfolio of projects that are very attractive to those who want to invest in sustainability. We started a big revolution in sanitation based on a new regulatory framework, attracting the private sectors to investments. Now we are making another big revolution with the new railways as well. Never before in the history of this country have I seen so many railroads projects being developed at the same time. We are talking about 36 orders for new railways at the same time, with an estimated investments of $30 billion. It is a revolution in our transport matrix, with which today is so dependent of highways, and all this with a game changer that no allows authorizations in a sector that was once based only on concessions. We have really a new approach in this area. We are showing that it's possible to have a green economic recovery taking into account an inclusive economy. So social justice is the key to success in this area, in infrastructure and all the country, and we are working on it.
And Marcia, do you think that the portfolio of investment of Patria is going to be, let's say, impacted by what had been discussed on COP26, or it's just like a continuing what you guys are doing?
I think that it's a continue what we have been doing. We've been working in our portfolio in doing our part better than we have been doing 10 years ago. So we are very worried about environmental and sustainability in our portfolio. And I think that we are taking what Rosie has said, and Amanda and Agnes. I think that we have to join our efforts from the private sector and the public sector. The private sector has the money to invest, and the public sector has the regulatory and the policies to be written in order to give security and say to the private sector to invest. I think that this is the where we can work together in order to have good projects where the private money could be very safe to put money in that project. So I think that it's time to work together in order to have good projects and good policies in order everybody to be very comfort to put money on these investments.
I think that you bring something related to geopolitics, let's say doing things with infrastructure and together with the private sector. So how we can together do something. So my question is the attractiveness of buildings and cities going to change according to these greenness and sustainable factors? Which are the key factors for landlords, occupiers, and talents today and in a close future, according to what's going on? We saw during the pandemic that many people went out of the cities and then they changed it to the countryside or other places in order to start living better. So what is going to be this key attractiveness that is changing due to all the sustainability way of life? So it's open to you guys.
Marcia, if I may. Okay, Amanda, please go ahead.
Go on, Agnes. Go on after you.
No, it's just because when we saw this movement from people going back from cities to the countryside, in Brazil, we witnessed this situation some years ago with the Universal Access Program that we have put in place in the last 20 years. Because we took electricity to the inland, people started moving back because then they could go, they could develop their activities there and go to school and do different things that before they couldn't. And then one of the panels we presented at COP26 in this Energy Day was about our new program that is called More Light for the Amazon, which is the last mile of a universal access program, which is something very important because we see several developing countries coming to this, 98% of universal access to electricity, but it's very hard to get to the 100% because at this stage we are talking about regions, very isolated regions where we cannot connect them through grids, or grids are very expensive to get there. So in the case of the More Light for the Amazon, what we are doing is coming with technological solutions with renewable energy, solar panels, batteries, and those things, to very isolated regions in the Amazon region. And it's very interesting because we presented there at the event, and it's publicly available at our website, at our page in YouTube from the Ministry of Energy, a video about this program, where we can see how the lives of these communities change with access to electricity. So it's very interesting because at one hand, when we discuss this change of perspective, people wanting to leave big cities, we think about comfort, quality of life, and those things from our more developed point of view. But when we see the realities in regions that are really less developed, there are small things like access to electricity that count for this movement. So what I wanted to say with our perspective is that we are doing this through electricity, and maybe Rose can point out better, but there's a lot of things being done with connection to telecom grids, to connection to of schools to internet grids, so that people can stay in the country. They don't have to leave to go to bigger cities. So I think this is, and from our perspective, working with public policies in a developing country, it is very impressive and very, very, it's an emotional thing, I would say, that we see how much progress we can bring with this basic policies, in fact.
Okay, so Amanda, up to you.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this, which is kind of like thinking more from a landlord, occupier, and maybe sort of like the talents perspective in terms of what does that mean for our cities. And it's really timely. We've actually just done at CBRE some research with our 20,000 occupier clients, and really try to understand what these changes are going to mean for them. So I thought I'd just share some data with you today that I think is probably relevant, wherever you sit in the world. And interestingly, I think 80% of real estate clients are thinking about the regulatory requirements that will be put on them, but 60% of them are actually driving to net zero, even though that isn't actually a requirement. And for me, that recognizes the fact that the pressure is coming from the money that's financing the real estate that's looking for the green buildings, which is back to my point earlier. And I think in terms of some of the key ESG considerations that are kind of coming out for investors, which it's worth highlighting here. And the first one of those is around energy saving, and net zero buildings are now becoming the new normal. So I think that's going to be a big change in our cities, and I think that's going to lead to, that's where the demand's going to be, and people are going to want to occupy those buildings. I think the other thing to say is that the gap between the green rental premium and brown rental discount is actually widening. So we're going to see more people actually wanting to have that green rental in terms of the buildings that they want to occupy. I think in terms of construction, what we found was that green construction materials are available and are viable. And if I give you a statistic, it's from the UK, but I think it's one that sticks in my mind all the time, that the equivalent of 1 in 6 houses ends up in landfill because of the wastage around construction processes. And that has to not be right. So I think we need to look at efficiencies and the materials that we're using in construction. I think the other thing is that the regulatory requirements will continue to tighten, and that's very much back to your previous point around what's the role of the public sector and where the driver's coming from. And I think the other thing is that effective risk and cost management can really enhance that resilience, and that's what we're going to see a lot more. So I think cutting energy and water use, securing sustainability related certifications, whatever they are in whatever nation, they're going to become the biggest environmental priorities for real estate decision makers. But I think it's quite interesting because one of the biggest blockers and challenges that clients say that they're facing globally around this whole agenda are actually quite practical issues around data, cost, and complexity. And I think if we can sort that out, then we might stand a fighting chance around some of the other things.
That's perfect. I don't know if Rose would like to make any comment related to that.
Yeah, just to agree with Agnes, I think this words was perfect because we really work thinking that a project is not only a project by itself, but a way to give quality of life, a way to include people in a good situation. So just to agree with Agnes and Amanda.
Now I'm going to ask for Marcia. So in Europe, so legislation related to ESG compliance are gaining momentum, as we could see for what we had mentioned here. So after the COP26, is there a clear pressure to countries like Brazil to move to the same direction? Do you feel that, Marcia?
Oh, I think so, definitely. I think you're being pressured by all the world. So the new taxonomy from Europe is going to be extended to other countries, I think. Then in 2023 and 2022, we are going to see some restrictions to products that are not ESG compliant. So I think that all of us are going to have to adapt in order to be compliant to these rules. We can see this at the SFDR. We have all the products that are sent commercialized in Europe are going to have to pass through some rules, and we are going to adapt to that. So it's important that everybody knows that, and this is a pressure in order to go forward. And this is a way without coming back. We have to do that.
And I think it's very much in the same line. So the universal method to report carbon in buildings and infrastructure has been launched, as Amanda had mentioned in the beginning. And Amanda, how long do you think this is going to take to really get to the investors and to landlords and everybody else to adopt it?
I think it's coming, and it's actually coming quite quickly, Marcia, is my point. And I think, you know, again, it's the benefits of having things like COP, because it really brings that drive and focus to it. And I think, you know, where we've got to is that we're at a real tipping point, and we need to sort of like really be thinking about probably under sort of like, I'd say something like 4 headings. And I think there's scientific, political, financial, and technological that really are driving this. And the scientists have been saying to us that, you know, there's now universal agreement, I think, on the fact that climate change is getting worse, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And, you know, when you look at the spend around the world in terms of extreme weather events, at 1.1 degrees, which is kind of where we're at the moment, extreme weather events last year cost the global economy something like 140 billion. And when we look at sort of like if we allow that increase to creep up to 2.5 degrees, you can kind of only imagine what the cost is going to be. And then we're also seeing so many of our animals going. So in terms of the biological diversity, you know, 80% of wild animals now extinct, 60% of vertebrates. So I think that impetus is there, which is back to the, you know, how fast can we run? We've got the technologies, we've got the capabilities. We've talked about some of the political in your question around, you know, what's the role of the public sector, but I think it's worth just kind of highlighting that we've now gone from 30 to 90% of global GDP spend under a net zero target of some description in just 5 years. But there's way more that needs to be done by 2030. So I think there's these target dates of 2030, 2040, 2050, and it's then how quick can nations get there. But just touching on the financial aspects, you know, you talked about landlords and, you know, kind of like their piece in this. Well, there's $130 trillion of assets under management that are committed to a net zero transition by 2030, and actually 1.2 trillion of real estate estates that are under management are committed to halving those emissions by 2030. So I think that gives the real target, because that's going to drive what people do. And, you know, I mentioned the stats around technological when I mentioned electric cars, but also worth just mentioning in that period of 2014 to 19, renewable energy, Agnes, you'll know more than this, and Rose, but renewable energy regeneration grew by 50%. Just in that one period. And I think what we've got is this real focus around renewable energies and the drive for that as we look forward now. So I'm really excited about, I think we've got real momentum now around this as a firm agenda. It's on the board agenda of any company around the world are really looking at this, and that really provides the focus. So I think it's really exciting, Marcia.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And then talking about technologies and renewable energy. So, Agnes, which clean technological and innovation will succeed? Because now we are talking about so many different ones. Which one do you think it's going to be the winner? Let's say, is aeolic, solar, hydrogen? What can be done? So which is the one that will drive us to the target?
Marcia, sorry to disappoint you, but I think there is no single one. The IEA, International Energy Agency report for net zero emission by 2050 pointed already out that we have to be able to develop several pathways in terms of technological innovations, and also related to the starting points in every country. So in our case, what I can tell you is we see that natural gas is still important for decarbonization of the fossil fuel industry, but associated with a lot of technological development in carbon capture storage and technologies that try to eliminate these emissions. And we see that this is like the homework that this fossil fuel industry is doing in order to persevere in this decarbonized world. So this is one thing. The other thing is we see that there are these hard to abate sectors, specifically with transportation, long distance transportation, aviation. So there are a lot of new technological development expected for advanced fuels, and some of them coming from biofuels as well. And we are working on this. So we have in Brazil a program that is called Fuel of the Future. So looking to these advanced fuels. Then naturally, hydrogen might be a paradigm shift. We always talk about the hydrogen economy. So if at the end we see that there is no way of decarbonizing fossil fuels, we have to think about shifting the paradigm and finding other energy vectors that work, and hydrogen might be one of these. So there is this big challenge in our case to develop the country to be able to work on hydrogen, and this is what we are starting to do now. And finally, we cannot forget, and in our case, this is much easier, in fact, are all the renewable energies. So solar, wind, biomass, biogas, and they are already very competitive in Brazil. We have been developing the grid, as I mentioned to you, and so there is no bottleneck, in fact, in getting more of this. So we are also discussing offshore wind right now, coming soon with regulation for offshore wind in Brazil. And despite the fact that we still have a lot of onshore wind potential as well. So when we think about this, the challenges might be then, and we are encompassing this in our energy plans, in developing or expanding the grids to be able to connect more of these more decentralized sources of energy and other big demands, like when we think about green hydrogen. And thinking about green hydrogen, another challenge which is important to be faced is the use of water resources, because water resources are very important for green hydrogen production through electrolysis. So, but then when we are discussing now the National Hydrogen Program, is to be able to have this comprehensive vision of the challenges and develop them all in the same time, so that we can move forward with this agenda.
Fantastic. And now for Marcia and Amanda. Any news related to greenwashing guidelines? What does it mean for infrastructure and real estate?
I think that I can start here, Amanda, and you keep on, okay? As I said, I think that there is an important issue that was launched by Europe, that is the SFDR regulation, in order to have a common taxonomy to that all the countries or the private sector could use the same language and are obliged to report what they are really doing. It's very important that it's very important for the ones that are doing the right thing to have this regulatory framework, because we can separate what is good and what's not that good. So everybody working on the same way, on the same path, it's going to be very, very important. And I think that this regulation, it's just for Europe now, but all the other countries are going to use and adopt this kind of information. So it's the thing that we are going to do, and we have to be prepared to adapt to that.
Yeah, I would basically say exactly the same, Marcia. I think you're right. I think there's a couple of things here. I think there's a piece around regulation that's absolutely key that we need to get in place, because the regulation is going to make sure that there's not the greenwash. And I think the other thing is how we set standards around. It's back to my point around what gets measured gets done. And I think that's, if you've got regulation and standards that come together, that's effectively where you're going to be able to control and manage where this all goes. So I think kind of on that point, we've got to avoid the greenwash. You know, people are getting called out on it all the time, and quite rightly so, quite frankly. But I think actually, you know, again, COP just brings this focus, and I think it kind of holds nations and governments to account. And I think there's a huge amount of this peer pressure, which is, you know, incredibly important.
Fantastic. We are coming to the end, and I would like to make a question for all of you. So, can we sleep well at night thinking that we are doing enough related to this topic? Are we going to succeed? Are we going to save ourselves from ourselves? So I think this is the question. Who can? Okay, Agnes, you jump first, or?
Okay. So once I was in a conference about energy transition, and then there was this question about if you are positive, optimistic, or pessimistic about energy transition, and then the Chilean representative said, we need to be optimistic because there is no other choice. So in our case, I would say that we are optimistic also because we see in this momentum an opportunity for creation. With the urgency of the climate emergency, we feel more free to come with outside the box solutions, and to think differently. And I think this is very optimistic, because usually we always think that when the in place strategy is working, we shouldn't change anything or a bit, but we know that this is not working, and that we have to do things differently. So I can sleep well when I see that we are being diligent to put all the efforts that we have to come with new solutions for this challenge. And this is what I'm seeing in our sector, in the energy sector. And when coming back from COP26, I see that this is a vibe in the world that people are really encouraged and embodied this sense of urgency and to come up with new solutions. So yeah, I can sleep well because I think we are doing the best we can.
Good.
Oh, I can jump now. I totally agree with Agnes. I think that we have to sleep well because we have to be very good with ourselves to work to do the right things. So we have to sleep well, to be well, and to work very hard in order to put all this stuff in place. I think that what was very good for me to see in COP is that we are discussing how we get there. And I think that there is a lot of money that was committed to do that. And nothing happens without money. And I think that the nations are committed and the private sector are pressure in order to get there. Not only the private sector, but also the non-government organizations, the population, and my child. She's 18 and she's pressured. So I think that we have to do something.
I'm happy to go next, Marcia, if that helps. I think we can sleep, but not rest. And I think we have to dream, okay? And I think we have to dream big. And I think it's back to, put simply, you can't measure, you can't reduce what you don't measure. So we have to get those baselines and the measurements in place. You can't finance what you don't value. And I think what we're seeing is that the finance, so green finance in particular, is truly valuing this. So I think that's really key. The ability to reduce begins with a baseline, and I think we're developing that unilateral baseline that we can start to measure from. We've got a lot of understanding around what needs to change. It's now about setting the ambition and then driving down to net zero. So it's actually now about action. But the key is going to be, what is the price that our investors, occupiers are going to pay for sustainability now to be kind of like truly become part of the agenda. So I think the sector really has the clarity around the problem. Investors and occupiers are saying this is something that they want to see happening, which is great. So it's on the agenda. I think for me, COP26 has provided a real focal point. As I say, that's the start of the journey. We need to kind of take it from here. We need to make sure we don't lose the momentum and we build out to reflect the challenging realities and the need now for action to avoid the stranded future assets and funds. And I think that's going to be key. So if we have that baseline, for me, sustainability has the value, but it's now time to act. And what we need to do is come together and share and collaborate the initiatives that work in different nations. And we need to kind of get that consistency around the regulation and standards. And when we've got all of that, we can sleep properly.
Perfect.
So I cannot say I will sleep well at night because I don't have so much time to sleep these days. But seriously, today I can say that I am part of a good team that has the chance to really change the situation. The transformations we are doing here change people's lives. It's very good. The best way to show people the importance of the environmental issue and the importance of dealing with climate change is show it with real action, not only with ideas but with actions. In fact, I think that is not enough to say that we are committed. We are proving that we are really committed with this. So being the example changes the world. I think we are doing a good job.
That's fantastic. What I think is that in a way, I think pandemic showed us that we are all connected. So there is not Europe or Latin America. So we are all in the same boat. I think this was very, very clear in the worst way possible related to the pandemic, what happened. And I think related to climate change, I think it's more clear for everybody that we are in the same boat, that there is no way one is going to be the winner and the other one is going to be the loser, or we all win together, or we are all going to lose together. So I think that the copy in a way showed us, and I think the guys that had gone there, I think more, let's say, in the past, not so many top people go to the COP. And I think that this year was different. So we saw many, let's say, high-level people coming and being worried about. And I think in a way we are learning that we are in the same boat, and this boat is called planet Earth. And we are all together on that. So thank you very much. I think it was a fantastic conversation. It was really an honor to have all of you. It was exactly how I wanted to have this conversation. And just thank you guys very much. And this hour was so fast that I didn't even see. Thank you guys, and let's continue the conversation. This was just the start.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thanks, everybody.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.